Okay, so yes, I'm excited to be a fellow as well. It's five schools, so it's Johnson and Wells, Queens, Johnson C. Smith, CPCC, and then UNC Charlotte.
Yeah.
So we meet twice a month as like a larger consortium with all five schools, and then on the other 2 weeks that we don't meet, we're meeting with like just our Queens cohort.
Hmm. So are
So I
the
mean, it's
are the other three people from Queens? Are you all seniors? All four of you seniors?
no. So there's actually one freshman. His name is Matthew. A junior. His name is Terrell. And then Rose and I are both freshmen. Are both seniors. So we graduate this year. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, that's great. Well,
So a good mix.
I was a late addition to the task force that the president that Dan appointed, and they had I think sort of overlooked the fact when they were talking about the sort of time the history of Queens as far as race, slavery, the holdovers, the aftermath of all of those years, and and so they didn't. They had a couple of alums, but they were very young alums, and so I think somebody thought that that was an oversight, and so they asked me to join, but I didn't really get on the task force until October, and it had been meeting since January. So
Wow.
I missed the early discussions, but it's been Dr. Fatherly is and Daryl are the co-chairs of that task force, and so it's
Mhm.
been really interesting meeting with them these last several months. So that's been good.
Right.
So I'm
Absolutely.
sort of in the, and we recommended, and one of the things that we talked about was having this kind of interaction with the other universities and colleges in the area. So I think it's good that you're doing this, and it's something that you could continue. That those discussions can continue. So,
Absolutely. I think that it's been very rewarding. I think that I tell Dean Rice all the time that, like, I think in elementary school, in middle school, I was never really like a history person because just in all transparency, I feel like we were just only taught the same few people for Black history, and you were taught the same thing for history. But diving deeper into like the history of Queens, though oftentimes it can be some painful results and some things that you're just not expecting. But it keeps you so engaged. It keeps you wanting to learn more, wanting to talk to more people. Um, I'm super excited to be interviewing you. I've had some, amazing interviews prior. I have two more on Friday. Um, and I think what's so interesting is that when you talk to the other schools, it's kind of like they're going through the same thing where research is limited and you're having to go the extra mile to find out different things. And then how similar our schools are, no matter whether it's a PWY or an HBCU, like we're all kind of going through the same thing. So it's nice to be able to engage in those conversations in a safe space. I think that's the biggest thing, like
yeah,
being able to talk about these things and not feeling as though you're going to be judged or looked at differently. Yeah, I think that's a pretty big part of it.
yeah. And I came to Queens. You said you folks had divided up the periods, and that you're really dealing with the 50s, 60s, and early
Yes, ma'am.
70s. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, so my experience at Queens really cuts across those years because I came as a freshman in '57 and graduated in '61, and then came back to Queens in '66 and stayed until the spring of '69, uh, where when I was teaching, and I taught a lot of students who were involved with a lot of the activities, and I think part of what our talking about our experiences sort of helps. It's just unbelievable to people coming along now what our experience was like. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, we all went to segregated schools. The black students and the white students all went to segregated schools. Um,
Right.
the Plessy versus Ferguson that was passed in the Supreme Court ruled in the late 1800s that separate but equal was the law of the land, held really until right in 50, and then Brown versus Board of Education in 54. My father was a school superintendent, and I come from a family very politically active. We've always been very active Democrats. We're all up on the most of us. I have a couple of outlier cousins who haven't seen the light yet, but we're all on the more progressive liberal side. Um, and so I came to Queens um, as a person who was really aware and of history. I come from an old Southern family. Have always been in North Carolina. And in '57, um, Eisenhower a um, signed a Civil Rights Act. That was the legislation, first bill that had been signed since the board. And even though Brown versus Board proved that segregation, separate but equally, was not true. Um, Schools still stayed segregated.
Right.
And even though growing up, I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is a very diverse community. It was then a lot of very strong as far as religious, very strong Jewish community, very strong Black community, very strong um, Greek Orthodox community, and also the home of Fort Bragg. So a lot of students that I went to school with had lived all over the world,
Mm.
and so it was. But still, we weren't integrated. And so right in the fall of '57, my freshman year was when Central High School, when the Black students who went to Central High School were met with in Little Rock, Arkansas. Four of us stood in the door, and those students were met with National Guard National Guard people, and turned away. So from the very beginning of my freshman year, we were aware and concerned and motivated to try to do what we could where we were. Charlotte schools were still, of course, integrated. Segregated. The busing hadn't started until that started very late in the '60s. So it was an exciting time to be in college. And my senior year, um, actually, I was the president of the Queens Christian Association, QCA. We didn't have any Black students at Queens at that time during my time. Um, but the Christian Association is different from the way the chapel works now. Every student was a member of PCA, and every student was a member of RA, the Recreation Association, and student government. And and I got involved in the PCA early in my years. We didn't have a chaplain, we didn't have any staff, so students really did everything. We planned chapel, we planned the religious emphasis. We actually were in charge of orientation. The dean's office cooperated with us, but we planned all of the orientation. So it was a very
Wow.
activist group, and as it turns out, people that were drawn to that group tended to be the more liberal students, the more progressive students. So we were always, our class, we all think our class is the best, and Adelaide and all of us in our class think, of course, 61 was the best. But we chased at everything. We had very strict social rules, all kinds of silly rules that we broke a lot. I was campus more than anybody in my class my freshman year for breaking rules. Um, and you could break rules then, be a rebel and not do anything very bad. But and then of course we were all we had a lot of interaction with Davidson, not so much interaction with Jackson C. Smith, which was strange because and we thought that was not a good thing and worked to change that. Because of course those three institutions are all Presbyterian institutions and come out of the same tradition. Um, and so my one of the things that was really, of course, 1960. Um, I got very involved in the gubernatorial race. It just seems extraneous from race at Queens, but it really fits because Terry Sanford was running for governor of North Carolina. And in those days, everybody was a Democrat, mostly. There was a very conservative wing of the Democrats, sort of the Dixiecrats. And then there was a more progressive, liberal wing. And Terry Sanford was in that wing. He was from Fayetteville, so he got all the college students from Fayetteville at all of the different colleges together and organized us to help him with the campaign. He was also the first, that was also the summer, the year that John Kennedy was running for president. And he was, and because one of the issues that he ran on was the whole racial equity and changing some of the, doing more in civil rights. He was also a Catholic, and there was a lot of prejudice against Catholics, and that was a big issue in the campaign. And Sanford was the first Southern governor, and I don't know how many other Southern governors came out in support of Kennedy. So when Kennedy came to Charlotte to campaign, um, Mr. Sanford, Governor, then later to be Governor Sanford, got us all together. So I got to meet Kennedy and talk to him and work, and have contacts with his campaign committee. And then there was a student, the person who was the president of the student Y at Davidson, who was a year ahead of me, had been to a leadership training school that the Christian Association was really part of the broader Y movement in colleges and universities. And there was a national training school every year, summer program at some seminary. Um, and Dave had been the year before and encouraged me to go, and nobody from Queens had ever been. So I went to the president and asked him if I didn't have enough. I realized I needed some help from the college, and I wanted their support. So he said yes and sent me to New York, which was an amazing experience.
Wow.
First of all, it was a whole summer program. We took courses at Union Seminary and at Columbia University. It was an integrated program. It was the first time I had been to school with or had intellectual conversations with a Black person. Um, Now, I mean, that just seems so real to you and your contemporaries, but it was a big deal, and we became great friends. There were several Blacks. There were several Oriental people of Oriental backgrounds and Hawaiian students. But it was just an amazing experience to have that, to be studying theology. But it was also a summer of intense social unrest, good trouble, as John Lewis would have called it. Um, and part of what was going on in New York and in the church broadly was a lot of emphasis on the social gospel, that you just don't go to church and worship, that you go to church and get inspired to do good work. And so there were all of these storefront churches that were springing up all over New York. Um, One of the churches that was most active in race and civil rights was Judson Memorial Church in the village. Several of us started going down there. The minister was Howard Moody. He was a worldwide known minister who was fighting for civil rights. Um, and we got to know him and work in the church. Of course, the church was integrated because it was in the village. We did a lot of outreach with homeless. So all of that whole experience for me was just seminal. Being away from home, being out of the South, being free from parents, from rules, from um, you know, from people that I knew. I didn't know anybody when I went,
Right.
um, and it gave me a lot of courage and insight. We did a lot with leadership training and organizing. So when I came back to Queens my senior year, I was loaded and ready.
I love that.
And had a wonderful council. The QCA council was just a wonderful group of women, and they were ready to do things. So one of the first things that we did was to decide that we had compulsory church and compulsory chapel at Queens during those years. So we didn't have church on campus, but the rule was that you had to go to some house of worship in Charlotte uh, on Saturday or Sunday, whichever was the day of worship. And then we'd come back and sign the church book that we had been to church. So there was always consternation about that. First of all, if you signed and falsified in the church book, that was an honor violation. It was all kinds of issues.
And
And
was this for all students at Queens or just
all,
students a part
all,
of?
all students at Queen. So,
Wow.
it was, in some ways, it was wonderful because we went to different churches. You could go to the Jewish synagogue if you were a Presbyterian, just so you went somewhere to worship on Sunday. And one of the huge advantages was one of the real leaders in race relations, civil rights, anti-Vietnam. See, the Vietnam War was getting cranked up, and that really happened more of that protest, and the mixture of the anti-war protests and the civil rights protests got conflated. But that was more toward the 68, 69 in the late 60s when I was back at Queens, and so I was involved in that too. But um, Dr. Carlisle Marney was the minister at the Myers Park Baptist Church. They had left the Southern Baptist Convention over civil rights issues and other issues, and he was known all over the country. He spoke at seminaries, he was at Yale, everywhere, but he was right across the street. So a lot of us started going to that church and got to know him, and he would invite us, a group of us, to come to his house to talk about theology and talk about race relations, and so he was a mentor without being on the campus, but also we were planning chapel programs. So we invited him to speak at chapel often. So that was a real benefit too. So and so one of the things we decided on the council was that compulsory church was not theologically sound. We thought we were seniors in college. We thought we kind of knew everything, so we could talk to the powers that be. Um, and we drew up this petition of 8 reasons why it was uh, antithetical to freedom to what we were learning as liberal art in the liberal arts, antithetical to the Christian faith, that worship was a response, not a requirement. Um, and Dr. Walker asked us trustees. So three of us appear before the board of trustees and great wisdom and knowledge to tell them how to run the college. And of course, they didn't take our, they didn't take that recommendation. But the next year, the president of the PCA was on the board when I was there, and she became president next year, and they brought it up again, and they did change it. So,
Oh, wow.
and so, and so, in '60, um, in the fall of '60, no, in February of '60, that was my junior year. Four college students sat in at the Woolworths in Greensboro. You've probably heard of the sit-ins in Greensboro. So that was in the fall. That was in the spring in February of '60. So '60 was a really big year. It was a sort of dividing point, I think. And right after following the sit-ins in Greensboro, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that everybody calls SNCC was formed. And that was, and so a lot of us followed that, but I don't think any of us at Queens, I never did participate in any of the sit-ins. I had friends who did. I had one of my very best friends at Wake Forest. Um, I dated at Wake Forest a lot and at Davidson and different places. And so there were leaders in those colleges that we got to know. But some of them some participated in those demonstrations and were arrested. But
And those are white or black students who participated.
those were white students.
Really?
Oh
Wow.
yeah, there were a lot of, and so and SNCC was integrated. There were white and black students in that group.
Hmm.
SNCC became it was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and they thought that the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that that Dr. King was really they were they thought they weren't forceful enough, that they weren't pushing enough, and
Yeah.
it became more and more aggressive, and the leadership then decided that nonviolence was not exactly the way to go. And toward the end of the '60s, SNCC um, was they floated a petition to join with the Black Panthers. So part of that was that some of that happened that the black leadership in SNCC um, didn't really welcome white students. Didn't they wanted to run their own protest. Um, and as it became more and more less and less peaceful, then other organizations were founded. But we and so we weren't really doing the marching, but I felt guilty about that, and I felt like we ought to be doing more. So I thought, well, what could we do? So I talked to the board and I said, let's do something. This is kind of, it seems simple and silly to think it was a huge thing now, but I said, let's have a retreat. Let's have an integrated retreat off campus with Johnson C. Smith and Davidson and Queens and spend a whole day together, eat together. Now, it seems silly now too, but sitting down and eating with someone of the other race in those
That
days
was
was
big.
revolutionary. It was huge.
Oh, that's big. That's big. And
Um,
this is in 1960 or
this was
1961?
in 1960. This was in the fall of '60. So, so we said, and so I talked to the presidents of the Y, Johnson C. Smith, and at Davidson, and they were, yes, let's do this. So the board, the QCA passed the resolution, and I took it to the president, and he said, "See, this is really not a good time. There was a lot of I don't know tension in the community, and presidents are always worried about how things look and how will it affect support among trustees and contributors. Um, and he said, it's just not a good time. And I said, he said, take it back to the board and see if you can come up with something else. So I took it back to the board. And they said, oh, I asked him, I said, we need money. We need, funds for this because we need to rent. We went out to the Y camp outside of town. It was a wonderful place to go. And it was a beautiful fall day. And so I took it back to the board and they, thank goodness, said, no, we're going to do this whether the college approves or doesn't. So I went back to Dr. Walker and I said, Dr. Walker, we're going to do this. And it would just mean so much to me and so much to us if we had your support. And he leaned back and he said, you know, if I were your age and if I were where you are and living in these times, I'd do exactly the same thing. So he said, you have my blessing. How much money do you need? The buck stops with me. So I said, we're not doing this for publicity. We're not going to ask the press. This is something we want to do. Um, so we're not going to make a big to do about this. This is something that we think is the right thing to do. So on a beautiful day, and so we set up a program. We decided not just to eat together and talk together. We wanted to read piece some literature and discuss it, have real discussions about a controversial um, civil rights, race relations issue. So we chose Alan Payton's Cry the Beloved Country, which had been published much earlier. It was in the late 40s, I think. He was a South African white leader who was huge in civil rights and fighting apartheid. And this book was a novel, but it had to do with all the things that kind of led up to apartheid, all of the racial inequity, the economic inequality, um, the rules, the white privilege, all of those issues were part of that novel. And so um, I worked with President of Johnson C. Smith and Davidson, and we did some readings from that among us. Um, and then we had really discussions about um, one of the reasons that book had come back with such force is that people were recognizing the same things that led to apartheid in South Africa were some of the conditions that we were living through in the state. And so if we could look at that, is there a way that we can do something to something that didn't so we wouldn't lead to that kind of problem.
How
So
many students came from each school?
I think we must have had. I can't find my folder. I, I'm going through stuff now trying to read out. I think we must have had about 120 people.
No way.
Yeah, and
Of black and white people.
yeah, all students
Oh.
together. We gathered, we talked, we walked together. We had time to, sometimes go off in smaller groups. We planned this wonderful meal. We had a meal together, and then we had these discussions. We broke up in little groups, and it was just wonderful. I mean, it was well, for me, as I say, it was the first I'd had those wonderful discussions this summer with other black students who other contemporaries. But this was a huge group, and
Yeah, absolutely. I thought you were going to say like 20 people. I didn't know you were going to say like 120. Like,
this
that's insane.
I think there were at least 100 people. I hope I can find my I hope I can find my
Like a
notes.
picture?
Yeah, but but it was interesting. I look back at my senior annual, and I don't think there was any note of it in the annual.
Mm.
I'll look again. I meant to look again right before we started talking. Um, but anyway, it was, and I think that sort of broke the ice. But by the time I came back to Queens in '66. Of course, in '61, the spring of '61, in January, Kennedy was inaugurated. We were all very involved in that. We took the radio to the dining hall to listen to his speech. The Freedom Riders started in the spring, so my whole senior year, it was just ramping up all of the protests, all the student involvement. And then when I came back, some of that conversation, of course, I knew students. I taught only freshmen and sophomores because I didn't have my PhD then. But a lot of those became leaders in at Queens, and some of the sophomores that I taught were already really involved in some of these activities. When SNCC got a little more radical, I don't know if you remember, there was an organization that was formed. It was called Southern Student Organizing Committee, SOC, and that was mostly white. That was mostly white Southern students because SNCC, because the black activists were really turning away white students who felt really they wanted to do something. This was important. So they worked really hard on voting rights, on organizing voting rights, on and there was an organization at Queens. There was one at Johnson C. Smith, one at Davidson. I don't remember whether UNCC had a group, but those students from those three colleges met together. So there was interaction in 67, 68, 69 with Johnson C. Smith with this committee, and they did a lot of work together. And Queens continued to send the president of PCA to these leadership trainings. And it turned out that my first cousin, who was a student at Queens in the late 60s, went to Berkeley in the summer of '68. Now, I don't know, '68 is one of those years that if you look at a timeline, there was the first. I mean, we had Martin Luther King was assassinated. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy joined the campaign. He was assassinated. The Democratic Convention in Chicago had all of those riots, all of that, horrible, bloody confrontation. 68 was a real, and in Berkeley was a hotbed of student protests. By that time, the war in Vietnam was raging, and so a lot of the protests were anti-Vietnam War protests. But a lot of the same people that were protesting that were also protesting, black killings by police. There were all kinds of riots, and so Doris Ray found her summer in Berkeley as seminal as my 60th summer in New York. She chose as her subcommittee race. She went to East Oakland, which was a black community, very poverty stricken. And the Black Panthers had started schools in East Oakland. She had relationships, contacts with Black Panthers in that experience. And so she's been working at those committees at Queens. So that's something I think that's interesting to put in the timeline. It'll be interesting to see what the students from Johnson C. Smith say and remember particularly about the Southern Student Organizing Committee, the SOC. That didn't last a long time. I think I don't know how long that committee lasted. But
was SOC only at Queens, or SOC was at
the national organization?
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that was a national organization that really grew out of the fact that white students were being pushed out of SNCC. uh,
Yeah.
not as welcomed in the protest. Um, and part of that was, you know, black students didn't want white students telling them they wanted to organize, and they knew what their
Yeah.
experience was, and it was
Right.
different. So, but I think some of them worked together. But it was an active. It was a southern, and it was a southern organization to try to take on particularly voter registration, getting more blacks registered and voting and joining with other activist groups. So it was and Lois Ray remembers that in the late '60s they also had a consortium on civil rights, and she remembers something about national news coming down and covering that at Queens. That
What was it called again?
it was a consortium on civil rights, and it was sometime in '68, '69. I don't remember. I know I was a part of that. I mean, I know I went to everything, but I can't remember really who was the leader of that at Queens. Maybe we go back and get some information at the library on that. But
Right.
so that whole decade, and that whole decade was a very, I mean, it was just alive with all of these discussions and all of these, um, I don't know, attempts to make a difference. Um,
Mhm.
and even though everybody in the student body, which is always true in every student body, everybody, there'll be students at Queens in my class that won't remember that retreat. They won't remember. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention that also in the spring when we planned Religious Emphasis Week, um, I went back to Dr. Walker and I said, we want to have Howard Moody come down from New York to be the keynote speaker um, for our religious emphasis group. He was the one that was at Judson Memorial in the village, and he was. I mean, he was just in huge demand. And Dr. Walker said, I can't imagine that he would come to Queens. And I said, well, I've got a kind of an ace in the hole. I went over to talk to Dr. Marty, and I said, Dr. Marty, I met Howard Lee. He is so wonderful. He said, of course he is. They knew each other, and because of their activism in not only in the civil rights um, and everything, but also in the Baptist family, and on the rebel side of the Baptist family. So I said, if you could give us some money, um, uh, he could come over to the Myers Park Baptist and have a workshop or discussion. And he said that'll be great, yes. And so I called Dr. I called Howard Moody and said, I'm Sue Ross. I'm a student. I'm a senior at Queens, and I met you this summer, and we just need you to come here and inspire us to do these great things. So he said, okay, and so he came, and it was just amazing.
You were just charming. Nobody ever told you no.
Well, it was. They all knew these things were not. They weren't urgent. As I look back, I wish I had been more proactive. I wish I had been more radical, maybe. But we were also Southern women. We were
Mhm.
also and our roles. I mean, women were just not
Right.
doing things. I mean, our choices for
Yeah.
careers were being a teacher or a nurse or a secretary or being a mother. Um,
Right.
and so we were, but we came of age at a time where we were experimenting, where we were, and as I was talking to one of my friends, we were sort of, uh, we were sort of caught in that. Okay, we're part of this culture, and it's not that we have manners and we have tradition and we have families that expect certain things of it, but we also are capable. And the women's movement was starting too at that time. Um, and that got so a lot of protests and glass ceiling attempts to break. So we were pulled in two directions, but it was also a very healthy. I mean, in my class, five people went immediately to graduate school. And that had never happened at Queen's.
Wow.
Because I was also the bridesmaid in 7 weddings that summer. Um, so, so it was an exciting time, and I'm glad I came of age in the 60s because it gave me courage to, to stand up for things I believe while still being able to walk the walk and talk the talk and maybe get some people on board that even when I went to Chapel Hill in the late 60s, um, the women's caucus in the English department, there were all of these women that were writing all of this protest poetry that had all these curse words and these, the F word and all of these things. I thought, that's not exactly the way to get equal rights. When I went to Chapel Hill in the fall of '69, um, there was not one woman on the faculty that was tenure track in the English department at Chapel Hill, one of
Wow.
the nation's great universities. Um, so that was, so we got in charge of the women's of the caucus, and several of us who were a little bit older and a little bit wiser, um, and made it a different kind of support group. So it was. I also realized that graduate students didn't have a vote in student government at Chapel Hill. So I went to the dean and I said, we need a graduate and professional student federation. So I went to the law school and the med school and the nursing school and said, we need to get our own student government so we can, have our student fees that we pay. We need to be using them for things that we like, not just what the undergraduates get paid. So
I want to be like you when I grow up. You
you are.
want something and you go after it and you get it. I mean, that's just, I don't know, it's just so inspiring. I will note that as you're telling me, about your time at Queens, it makes me think about Miss Bernice Fulson.
Yeah.
And so I actually got to meet her family last week. Probably the highlight of just being
Oh,
at Queens.
great.
Yeah, so she died in '88, but she still has her daughter and son living, her daughter-in-law and her grandchildren. So I spoke with the family last week, and it's so interesting because you graduated in '61,
Yeah.
she becomes integrated in '62, she becomes a student in '63 and graduates in '64. And so, you know, I'm just applauding you in my head because I think about if it weren't for like you saying how important that retreat was to you and you going to the board of trustees, those are probably the same people who made the decision that, okay, hey, it's time to integrate Queens. And so by you having this retreat and getting all these tools together and it being successful, I can only imagine if that's one of the things that was going through their heads when they were making this decision. Because Queens was one, as we've done the research, we've realized that Queens was one of the very few last colleges in North Carolina to become integrated, especially after Brown versus Board of Education. And so, you were the trailblazer in like getting, the Board of Trustees to realize that we can't continue to just have a campus that not only is separated from men, but is separated from other women who just have a different skin color.
Yeah.
And so I think that's super interesting. It's crazy because, 2 years prior, you and Miss Bernice could have crossed paths. But one thing that we've realized is that she was a non-traditional student. And so she was actually a lot older. She was born in 27. And so she had already gone to school at North Carolina A&T, but she wanted to go back to school so that she could teach nursing and spend more time with her family because she couldn't really do a lot of, she wasn't able to balance being a mother and being there for her family, and but then also being a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's pretty interesting. I mean, we learned last week that there were a group of women in 78 or 87. I'm getting the numbers confused in my head. But basically, there were 5 women that started off as nursing students at Queens. And out of the 5 students, only one ended up graduating. One thing that she realized in her freshman or sophomore year is that the classes that the Black women were taking were not the same classes that the white women were taking. What they realized is that Queens was making them take remedial classes and not getting credit for it and didn't tell them. And so that basically their nursing program would have been 5 years versus the typical 4. And so, you know, as we're learning these things, it just makes me think about how we take like 10 steps forward and then we're pushed like 20 steps backwards. And then we go forward and then we come a few steps backwards. But I am just inspired by how willing you were to ask for things and not take no for an answer and figure out a way to make it happen. Like I said, I was not expecting that retreat to be that many people. I literally thought it was like 20 people doing a kumbaya and sitting at a campfire and, you know, having conversations, and it just absolutely was not that. And that's just, as a Black girl at Queens and having gone through a few racial interactions at Queens that almost steered me away from staying, like that's inspiring to know that someone during that time was willing to put themselves on the line to be a trailblazer, and ultimately making it possible for students like me to even attend Queens. I do have a few questions for you, though, if you don't mind answering them.
I'll be glad to.
So I think this is kind of a different question because at this time, Queens wasn't integrated. But one thing that we've learned is that the very first picture of a Black person at Queens was someone who was on like janitorial services, and I think it was in 1905 or 1910. So do you ever, or have you ever, can you recall a time where you maybe experienced racism, where maybe someone who was white was maybe like disrespectful or said something like out of line to someone who was Black, who was maybe like I said, maybe a janitor or working in the cafeteria or anything like that?
No, I that's another part of growing up the way we did. Um, this just reeks of white privilege, but we grew up with people working in our homes with us, with Black people that we loved and that we had respect for, and that their grandmothers knew our grandmother. And so it would have been the farthest thing from our training and our upbringing to be disrespectful for anybody who was in that position, who was a maid or a janitor in the building or who worked in the cafeteria. Miss Betty came to Queens
65.
In what year?
She'll tell me, and she'll tell anybody. August 12th, 1965.
Okay, so she was not there when I was a freshman, but she was there when I came back. Mm-hmm. And we just adored her. Now, you know, and she adored us, and we talked to her about all kinds of things. And we still give each other huge hugs when I see her. Every time I go to Queens, she's one person that I will not leave the campus without going by and seeing. So, no, there would have not been, that would have been totally antithetical to our upbringing. So that didn't happen. That wouldn't have happened. I mean, if it happened, it would have shocked me, and whoever had done that sort of thing would have been castigated.
Absolutely. Well, my next question you've kind of already answered, but basically it was just asking like, can you recall like any events related to like civil rights or dismantling segregation that was happening in the community? The reason why I asked is that as we are conducting this research, finding articles has been a little challenging. about like the different events that are going on in Charlotte, even though we're talking about our universities. Um, so, I mean, can you maybe recall any events that were happening during that time?
Well, in Charlotte, when I was there the second time, I mean, when I came back to teach, um, the Swan family sued the Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education about, let's see, what year? Let me just make sure. Let me look. I looked that up because that was because busing was a huge. Um, Let me see. I thought I had made a note. Oh yeah, in 1965. So the Swan family sued Charlotte Mecklenburg. In 69, it went through, it took a long time. In 69, Judge McMillan, who was a white judge, a huge hero of the civil rights movement, ruled in favor of the Swan and said that the suit was because their child um, was was going to a black school, was going to a school and having to walk past the school that was close to their home, and so they were petitioning. Their suit was to have their child go to the school that was in their neighborhood, which was a white school. So so they so Judge McMillan ruled in their favor, and part of his ruling was that all effort to integrate. Now, I mean, we're talking about 69, um, so the public schools were still integrated. I think in Charlotte then only there were 42% of the schools were segregated. Um, and a few of them had maybe, some schools had maybe 6 black students in a white school, or the other way. Um, but anyway, and he included busing, and so then, and that case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that he was right, that all efforts must be made to integrate, including busing. And so busing was a huge issue in Charlotte in the late 60s, early 70s.
And did you say Swan as in SWANN?
Uh-huh.
Okay, got you. I'm gonna have to look that up. I've never heard about that case, so we'll definitely have to
Yeah, look at that case because that was very interesting, and the aftermath and how it went to the board. There were all kinds of, once he made his ruling, there were protests about that, and went to the Supreme Court. So that was a huge, that was a landmark case for integration. My father, this is an aside. My father I went to him in my high school wisdom in '64. I was in junior high, and I said, "Dad, now Brown versus Board just got passed. Why don't you integrate the schools tomorrow morning?" And Daddy said, Daddy said, I would be run out of town on a rail by the black community and the white community. And he said, and what he had tried to do, what he had done to prepare, because he was in favor of integration, but what he was doing to prepare was when he first went to Fayetteville in '51, they built a new black school, high school, and a new white high school. And he told the board he wanted the black school to cost more, several dollars a square foot more than the white school. He wanted it to be better, and he hired teachers with master's degrees. He supported a black leader in Dr. Edwards in town to be on the Board of Education. Boards of education weren't so politically fraught as they are now. And and in 1968, when all of this stuff was going on in '69 in Charlotte, the schools in Fayetteville were integrated without incident. Um, when my daddy, right the year before he died, Fayetteville State University which is a traditionally, is a historically black institution in Fayetteville, um, honored 5 civil rights heroes of the 60s. And my daddy was the only white person on the stage. Um, he was lauded as a civil rights hero for the way he went about integrating the schools. One way was to build a school on the line on the neighborhood. Part of the problem with school integration was that housing was so segregated. So when you tried to put a neighborhood school somewhere, by definition, it was going to be a segregated school. And so what Daddy did was, in addition to having the two schools that were already there with new buildings, he built a new school that was right on the line between the black community and the white community. And so that school was naturally integrated. The year it opened in '68, it was 50-50 black and white.
Wow.
He always went to the school was named for him, and he always went to Fayetteville to crown Miss Lee Ross High School, which some years would be a young white woman, and some years it would be a young black woman. So so that but those schools were, I mean, those schools in Queens was late to integrate, but we were all coming from totally segregated school systems. So yeah, it was. But he was right. But he said, "Do you think I would they would have me on a rail out of town, and it wouldn't be the white people. It would be black too." So
Yeah, absolutely. That's funny. I know that's something you definitely remember. Um, so, I'm going to pick your brain a little bit. How do you think your experience at Queens would have been different if Black women were allowed to attend Queens during the time you were there?
oh gosh, it would have been. I mean, it would have been wonderful. I mean, we would have had those relationships. I wouldn't have had to wait till my senior year. Some of them had between my junior and senior year to have an intellectual conversation. I mean, we had relationships, but there was always a power dynamic. You were always the employer. I grew up. My grandmother lived in a rural community. I worked in tobacco, handing tobacco, and there were black kids and white kids working together. But there was still. I mean, we still weren't. It wasn't an equal dynamic, of course. We still had conversations, but it wasn't like being in a class with somebody. It's the same sort of thing um, as being in teaching a class with men in it and not women. I had taught at St. Mary's, which was an all women's school. I taught at Queens, which was an all women's college. I had taught at Chapel Hill with men and women, and then went to Davidson, which had recently, when I went, had only recently admitted women. Um, the difference in teaching, I can't, the difference in teaching literature with men and women to react to character, to react to themes. Um, I taught a seminar in literature of the Jazz Age, and I taught the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, think about what it would be to read Langston Hughes if you were reading that and studying those poems and having a conversation with black students your age. I mean, I I can't imagine. It's like you need to hear from people's experience when they interpret literature. So yeah, I would have been very pleased. I just lived a little early for that. So, but since I was on the board of trustees and meeting with students and talking with students and having interactions um, with black students and white students and also at David's, uh, I had I had an interesting conversation with with a student of mine a young black woman who never said anything in class, and her first paper, it was just a stunning paper, so good. And so I asked her, she stayed a minute after class, and I said, you have such wonderful ideas, and you're not, I'm disappointed that you don't feel free to, to express those in class, and it's not fair to the class, and it's not fair to you. And so I'm going to expect you to speak up because you have a lot to add. And we talked about that, and she said, I'm the only black student in this class, and it's like, well, what does the black student have to say if I speak up? And I said, well, I understand that. I was in a class. I've been in classes with all men. And it's like, okay, well, what does the woman say? And I said, I don't, that's not as stark as being black uh, in a white dominated class, but it's a little bit, at least I have a little
Yeah.
sense. Um, so, anyway, yeah, it would have been great. I would have loved to have taught. I would have loved to have taught the Harlem Renaissance. And I did have I had a black student in one of my seminars, one of my English seminars. So we got a little bit of that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So as an alum, what does the name change of Burwell mean to you as a former student? And why do you think there were a handful of alum who weren't too on board with the decision?
I think there are more than a handful. I think this is a complicated, obviously, hugely complicated issue. Um, and I had been involved and been aware of we did a lot of name change in the buildings at Chapel Hill. Um, and the question is, there are several questions. Um, and one is, I wasn't on the task force when that recommendation was made. I have supported that recommendation. I have supported that when I talked to some of my friends who were my contemporaries. Um, because, but the, but the issue is, and I think part of it needs to be explained. Are we going? And we did all of this research into the names of all the other buildings on Queens, and I was part of that, researching some of the buildings. Was anybody in the family ever involved? Did they ever own slaves? Was it, are you going to disqualify somebody, um, for 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 being for honoring them with a name on a building if their great grandfather owned slaves? Do you do that? Is that I mean, my gosh, we come out of a, we come out of a section, and that is slavery is the original sin of this country. And many of our families were involved in that. Does that make does that stain then come to me as a descendant, and then there's nothing I can do or say or live the way I live that will compensate for that? We have I grew up with inherited guilt. One of my students asked me once if I felt guilty because of my family's background. I said yes. I feel guilty about a lot of stuff. I'm a I'm a Presbyterian. I'm a Calvinist. I feel guilty that I've got original sin, coursing through my being. But I don't think I think all of that does is motivate me to do what I can to make to provide a level playing field now. Now I think the Burwell decision was that's the same generation. But then if we just say, did you own slaves, then we'd have to take Washington's name off the monument, Jefferson's name off the monument. Are we going to do that? I think I have in my own mind, trying to deal with this, that if someone was a member of a clan, was a member of the clan, that's a terrorist organization. I,
Absolutely.
I see that as separate from being a part of the culture, of the economic culture that was slavery at the time. If somebody is an active terrorist, racist terrorist, I don't think a building should be named for that person. What to do about that person's child or grandchild? Um, that these are thorny issues we're going to be dealing with for decades. I think the thing that happened with the Burwell was was finding the journal, was having access to the journal, and that they not only owned slaves but were cruel and mis and mistreated those people if there was an addition to owning them. I think that was, and because it came up and it was I think in my heart of hearts I wish that the decision had been I wish the decision had been later and had been the result of recommendations after the task force had finished its work rather than doing it just boom. I think it would have yeah, I think it would have helped with bringing more people on board, having more discussions. I think it was my own personal opinion. It was made precipitously, and but that's my personal opinion. I think it would. I think the recommendation would have been made, um, but it would have been made in context. Um,
Do you think that a lot of people weren't on board because they feel like changing the name is like erasing Queens' history?
your speaker is a little bit. I'm having a little bit of a hard time.
Do you think that a lot of people were upset about the change because they feel like changing the name is erasing Queens' history?
Um, Well, I think so, Brian, because that that building is, well, I think we can do a good job in what, I mean, think about all of the controversy that went into Chapel Hill with Silent Sam and the all of that business, and they still haven't figured that out. I mean, that's been what 2 years, and part of the plan was to put that in context. It had gotten so sort of almost it was just a fixture. And then it became clear that it did make African American students it was just a symbol that they found that made them uncomfortable and made them feel other than. And so I think what we've got to do as far as the boroughs are concerned is put put the name in context. That was part of the recommendation, but it didn't because it was made so quickly. I think if they could have done it with a plaque and with some history, here, Anna Burwell's picture is in the somewhere in a closet. In this that's going to have to be we'll have to talk about that, and this is going to be something that we'll have to communicate. I'll be real curious myself. I'm the Queens Fund agent in my class to get money for Queens Fund. So I have lots of conversations with my classmates when I'm calling and asking them for money. And I'll be real curious how often, how much they bring that up, if they're aware of it, whether that'll affect how they feel about, somehow that part of the tradition just the tradition of loving that building and having that building be the center of community. Um, I think we'll all sort it out. But I think there needs to be education. There needs to be a real big article in the Queen's Journal with some background and a well-written article, um, and some background of how that was done.
I agree. I agree. I will say that as a black student at Queens, as a black woman or young woman at Queens, being a part of like the Black Student Union and the uproar of social justice and racial silence that, occurred last year, though the decision was made very, very quickly, um, a lot of us felt like, okay, so to give you context, when George Floyd was murdered last year,
Yeah.
a lot of us felt like the school, and a lot of us, as in Black students and Hispanic students, students of color, we just felt like the school didn't necessarily have our backs. We felt like the school did not act in a very prompt way. We felt like the letter that they eventually sent us was very vague, and oh, this is something that we just crossed off our list. And then we were already upset because we had found out about the Burwell situation in general.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's bad enough that you're this Black student on an all white campus and you already feel secluded. And then you hear that a name is named after, I mean, a building is named after a former slave owner. And then you have, Ahmaud Arbery killed, Breonna Taylor killed, George Floyd killed, and countless others in this one year. And the response isn't prompt enough. You just feel like, okay, well, do they really care? Or are we just here to diversify the school? Are we here to just get your numbers up? And so when that change was made, I'm not even going to lie to you. I mean, it was definitely a sense of not necessarily relief, but just like solace.
Yeah.
Like it was like, okay, wow, like they really do care. Or wow, they went to the extent of changing the name. We know how big of a deal that is.
Yeah.
But we too agree that to the to the public, to the broader community, to the Queens community, there should have been more education on what happened, why it happened, and then why we're having to act in this way. I think people know like the bare minimum of what the he say, she say is, but they don't really know the context. And I think if people understood and were aware of the context as to why the change was even thought of in the beginning, I think that a lot of people, Black people too, just would have been a little bit more on board
Mm-hmm.
and would have felt a little bit more content about it. Because I mean, there are some people in this world who just still believe that racism doesn't exist. There are people who still believe that, you know, slavery happened a long time ago, so we shouldn't be harping on these things now. But at the same time, I feel like there are also some people who just don't know. And if you educate them a little bit more on why you're doing certain things, I feel like they can come to the conclusion that, wow, we do need to make this happen. Or,
Yeah.
wow, we do see the reason why they are acting in this way. Because as a Black student, who was called the N word her freshman year, and then to hear this my junior year, it it was a very traumatic experience because all I could think about when I heard about the Burrow situation is being called the N word on campus my freshman year.
Yeah.
Like that was it. Literally just kept going through my mind, kept going through my mind, kept going through my mind. Or the scenario where my sophomore year, my boyfriend and I, we were housing and camps assistants, so we were RAs during the summertime, and he was going to a shift in the Levine Center because we had to open the gym, and you know how Myers Park families, they walk all throughout campus and things like that. I mean, it's normal. Um, 6 a.m. 6 or 7 a.m. in the morning, a little girl with her mom, she yells, "Mommy, mommy, it's a robber," because my boyfriend had on a black hoodie and
Mm-hmm.
some black sweatshorts and some basketball shoes and a hat. And so, you love your school, but when you go through traumatic experiences like that and you hear something to that magnitude and nothing's done about it, or you don't feel like enough is being done, it really makes you stop and think, did I really choose the right school for me? Is this a school that I'd be willing to give back in the future so that, other students can have an opportunity to receive an education? But I also think that it goes back to what you said about education. You have to educate people. You have to give them context as to why certain decisions are made so that they are a lot more aware in the decision
Well,
process.
that's really helpful. I appreciate so much for being so honest and forthcoming about that. And I had wondered because it really was, it's sort of like this time with all of the Black Lives Matter, which we supported. Um, you're talking about the relief with the name change was probably similar to my relief when I wake up the morning after Joe Biden had won the presidency. It's like this huge thing that you didn't realize was pressing on your chest. You
Absolutely.
know, is gone. So, um, but I just, yeah, we never. I mean, I didn't have a. I knew that Burl and his wife had been ministers, and they were part of the founding. You know, they were the first. He was the first president of the college. Um, but we didn't do all this. We didn't have any kind of context.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, but I do think so. So let me ask you this. I'm curious. So after all of when and particularly with um, with Floyd and with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Trayvon Martin, I mean there are so many of those incidents that those names that are now part of all of our worldview. So do you think the college? You said you didn't think the college did enough. I'm curious what would have what would have been an appropriate response for the administration? Do you think just some kind of getting Black students together and talking about it, or I mean, what would have been a better appropriate response?
So I have a mentor. He's a white man, and he asked me the same question. I tell him that he is the white grandfather I never had. I mean, he is my person. And I explained to him that the first thing that they should have done is they should have sent out an email to the Black Student Union. Tell us personally how you feel.
Okay.
We have this organization where, a lot of people, I remember my freshman year, there was this one guy who said, why can't we have a white student union? I'm like, the entire school is a white
Yeah,
student
right.
union. Like, what do you mean? We have this space, and it's not to seclude anybody. It's a safe space for us to do things, you know, as a community, but then also to educate those around us who don't look like us. There are people like Daryl White who are over dice. Somebody should have said, hey, Daryl, let's get all the Black students together and let them know that if they need us, we're here.
Yeah.
Hey, Daryl, can you set up a Ring Central meeting for all the students so that we can talk to them? Or, hey, can we have health and wellness? Reach out to our Black students and make sure that they are okay. I think this is the first time that I realized I've always been a campus leader. I mean, leadership is just something like I think I would have been you during that time that you were in Queens. Like, I mean, that's me. But I had never received so many text messages and emails. Like, Sydney, President Lugo, Dr. Fatherly, Daryl White, that like talk to them, ask them why they haven't reached out to us. I actually had a conversation with VP Forrest Mills during the summertime because I was very upset because I think for a long time I felt like the token Black girl of Queens. I feel like I'm that Black girl that they asked to do a lot of things, and though there are some great opportunities, I cannot lie to you and tell you that sometimes I want to say no. Sometimes I just don't feel like it's because I am intelligent or brilliant. Sometimes I just feel like they need a Black face. And so for someone who's involved in so much, and for administration, people I know dearly, people I can email or call whenever I need, for them not to reach out to me, I don't know, it just kind of felt like a slap in the face. I felt
Uh-huh.
this heavy weight on my shoulder that I had so many students who look up to me, asking me, what are they going to do for us? And I couldn't even give them a response because nobody had ever reached out to me. I know that it is the summertime, but I mean, it might have taken them like 3 or 4 weeks to send out a letter. And I am not oblivious to the fact that our board of trustees is not, that diverse, right? I don't negate the fact that President Lugo has to move differently because he is a Black man at a predominantly white institution. I understand that. But as a Black student who, thankfully, I don't pay to go to Queens, but I work hard at Queens. I work hard to, do the things that I've
Absolutely.
done. I just expected more. I mean, to put it in context, I mean, I was having dreams that like my dad would be the next person, that my three little brothers would be the next, that my boyfriend, who is literally 20 minutes from Trump Town in North Carolina, would be the next person. I mean, these are things that you
Hmm.
constantly think about. Social media can be so beautiful, but it can be so traumatic. To
Yeah.
see George Floyd's video, I mean, it was very I don't know. I just remember not feeling like myself. And I remember coming to Queens and people telling me not to attend a predominantly white institution and to attend an HBCU because HBCUs are going to take care of you. And because you're a Black student at a Black school, you're going to feel better. But I always knew that I had to go to a school that was different from my high school, that was different from where I was used to, because that's not what the world looks like. And to have gone through certain experience, multiple experience that have tried to sway me from this path that I know I need to take in this moment, I did not feel supported. I did not feel like my school had my back. And I think because I go to a small school, I can only imagine what students at like Duke or UNC Chapel Hill feel like when they're at these larger institutions. But I go to a small school. I know the folks in administration.
Yeah.
And if anything, before even after you sent that letter, specifically let the Black students know that we see you, we hear you, we're there for you. And I didn't feel like that. And so
Oh,
I actually had a meeting with VP Flores Mills, and she said, Sydney, you know, she said, I'm so sorry. Um, I started to text you. I started to email you. I started to email my Black students. But then there was something in the back of my head that made me stop because I didn't want certain students to feel like I was like not including them, because I don't know every Black student at Queens. But I told her, though I totally understand that, how you mitigate that is saying, it's sending out like a mass email to all the Black students, giving every Black student the opportunity to attend a session where they can vent and be themselves and just talk to you. I think that would have just been a lot better. But this vague, generic email that, I kid you not, students either looked over, deleted, or were upset after reading, i.e., me, it just wasn't enough.
yeah. Well, that makes so much sense. And I just, as a part of that larger community, I am so sorry. And I think that's the part that that all of us need to learn, and that I think we're learning from this is that we just need to listen. We need to listen more, and we need to hear voices. Are some of those conversations going on now? I mean, has it improved since you've been back on campus as far as people in the administration? I mean, has
No one has talked about it, and I think that's another.
do you think people feel embarrassed, or like, I may say the wrong? I think a lot of times we wonder if we're going to say the wrong thing. What I hear from my Black friends is, if you say something, it's not going to be the wrong thing. I mean, if it's
Exactly. Or
you're
I'd
not
rather
going.
you say something than not
Yeah,
say anything. But I think for me, I mean, I graduate in less than 60 days. I feel like it was just a check off the box because we haven't had and I get it, it's virtual, and the whole virtual thing is kind of played out, and we're tired of doing these like Ring Central meetings and things like that. But there hasn't really been that much discussion about. Now, I will say that President Lugo did have an implicit bias training. I think a few weeks ago. I wasn't able to attend because I was at work, and I have a lot of friends who said that it went really well. Um, I think for me in particular, it's hard for me to even think about what they haven't done because of the work I'm doing with the Fellows Project, because I'm so engrossed in it now
yeah,
that I've kind of not even thought about the fact that we haven't heard anything, or no one has really said that, that much more about it. Now I will say that Rabbi Judy is also one of the advisors with Dean Rice over the consortium for Queens, and she talked about how they were trying to get a professor to teach African American studies, and she asked for our input. And the only suggestion I gave her is that it needs to be taught by a black woman or a black man. Like I just feel like it's so contradicting for students of color who have been asking for an African American studies class forever and not to be able to have it, and then it not be taught by someone who looks like them. It makes it such a difficult environment, because when they ask questions, everybody looks at you to try to have answers. And it just it doesn't really make it that insightful, I'd say. um I I'm thankful for the consortium, because I just really hope students apply for it next year. I really hope students see the benefit of it beyond the financial benefit. I mean, these are some life lessons that we are learning that I know I will take forever, grad school and all. But I think that I think that it boils down to people not being scared to step on other people's toes. I think that's what it is. I feel like, for a long time we've walked on eggshells at Queens, because we're scared to say the wrong thing, or we're scared to make the wrong move. But in my eyes, and I know a lot of my black friends feel the same way, is I'd rather you do something than not do anything, because when you don't do anything, it feels like it just feels like you're silent. And then
Yeah.
you say you're an ally, but you can't show me how you are an ally. And so it causes me to distance myself from you. For example, like this summer, you had all and not even just Queens people, but you had everybody reposting, 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 but nobody's reposting now, or nobody's engaging in activism work. Nobody is doing anything to, well, I won't say nobody, but the majority of people who were saying they were allies, you know, you don't see them trying to engage with students who don't look like them. You don't see them trying to educate themselves more on what they didn't know. So it was almost like, okay, this thing happened. Okay, check, we're on with life. And as black people, we don't get to just check it off the box and then just move on with life. Like have to we have to continue to go through it. And so I think, and I personally told this to President Lugo. I said, as the I remember him asking me, like, what is your, I can't remember if he asked me like, what is your biggest concern with Queens, or what is the biggest improvement you want to see in Queens, something to that magnitude. But I told him, I said, I think that Queens has worked so hard to diversify its student population. Now it's time to diversify the faculty. Now it's time to see faculty who aren't a part of this white majority, because it'll I will say that I've only had one black professor, no, two black professors being at Queens, and only one of them were full time, or who were part of actual like
Yeah.
faculty. And
I'll
so,
have to, I'll have to tell you that that discussion has been a huge one for years. And well, I'll have to tell you this anecdote. We had a wonderful Anthony Fox, who was president of the student body at Davidson, and is black, and he and yeah, was that, yeah. Anyway, he came in. I just, one of the people I admire the most. And he came in. I was a registrar, and he came in to get a transcript to send to law school. And I saw all of these requests for transcripts going to all these law schools. So I called him in and I said, I see you're doing all these law school applications. And I said, you've been leading the movement to try to get more black professors at Davidson. I don't think there was one on the faculty then, or maybe one, I don't know. But anyway, And I said, every single, I said, do you, I said, if you would, don't go to law school, go to graduate school. That he was a political science major, great student, and had all the stuff. I said, go to get a PhD in political science. You could name your price. You could go to any university in the country. You would be, you know. And he said, Sue, I really appreciate your confidence. But he said, my my mother is a teacher, and I'm very, very supportive of education. And he said, I can do more as a politician for my people than I can in the, in the history department or political science department at some college. And I said, but, but do you know, one of my friends on the faculty at Davidson was chairman of one of the departments, and they were looking for I mean, they specifically wanted to do a minority hire a person of color. And there was one person in the United States that year, one black graduate of getting a PhD in that field. And this was just recent. Now, so part of the institution's problems with hiring is that so many capable, wonderful, capable black students who are graduating, are going to law school. They're going into business. They're getting hired at 3 times the salary they would ever make as a professor right out of college, because they're, because everybody wants these capable people. And so I said, you know, you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. And of course, he has made a huge difference in his community and in our community. I mean, he was Secretary of Transportation in Obama's administration, um, Mayor of Charlotte. But I remember having that conversation. He said, I see where you're coming from, but I said, if we don't get these black students at Davidson going to graduate school, where are the professors going to come from? So that's, just that's an aside. If there's no excuse not to have, but if somebody like that, um, are they going to come to a small white, liberal arts school in the South? Are they going to go to Harvard or Yale or Stanford or Princeton?
Right.
Anyway, it's something we've just got to continue to work on, and the work you're doing, I think, is just so important. And I hope you'll feel when your journey at Queens is over, is that you really did make the right decision to come, and that you have made. I mean, I can't imagine the influence that you've had, and students, white students who've been able to know you just on the cheerleading squad, going to class, being at the being on the trip to Ireland, that you that just your presence and your personality and your leadership ability. I mean, that's life shaping for other students, and I know it's a burden to carry. We carry it too. When I went to Davidson, and Davidson had been co-ed only 4 years when I went in '77. In my first year, when I was into my second year, I was associate dean of students, and one of the women came to me and said, "We want to start a women's eating house." Um, and I said, I just can't understand that. I would think the eating house would be so great to be co-ed, and you'd have conversations with guys, and it wouldn't be a dating situation. It wouldn't be all this social pressure. And she said, Sue, we need a place where we can come together and be with other women and talk about things we care about. We also eat differently from the men. We want to plan our own meals. We want to have programs. We want to have speakers in. Um, and she said, didn't you enjoy being with other women when you were an undergraduate? I said, yes, absolutely. And I said, well, bingo. Yes, let's start it. We'll start it. We'll get it started. We'll have you on campus next semester. So, so anyway, I understand that sort of, and that was true when the Black Student Coalition started at Davidson too, but it's important to be with people who look like us. But it's also important to have those other interactions. And so I'm very in favor of integration. I'm very in favor of co-education because I think, like you say, that's the way the world is. And if we don't learn to navigate, you'll be so much more capable when you get out of school, having had the experience you had at Queens. You'll take those leadership skills when you're at Ohio in Ohio next year, and you see something wrong, and you see something that needs to be done, and you think black students need to be involved. You'll go. You'll go to the dean, or you'll go someplace, and you'll make it happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that um, I know in my heart that I made the right decision because I wouldn't have been afforded as many opportunities as I've been given as a student at Queens. I don't think I would have been as supported from another university. And I mean, I truly feel like I have family here, not just Black Student Union, family from a professional standpoint, family from other white students. I mean, students in general. I mean, I truly feel like I've made my mark at Queens, which is one reason why I'm a true advocate for mentorship. I have 4 mentees at school right now. I call them like my little sisters, but they're part of the LEAD program. So where students of minorities get paired with other students, and I've been a mentor since my sophomore year.
Good for
And so
you.
this is one of the reasons why I tell them like you have to pay it forward for other Black girls that come after you because I can't be big sister to you if you're not willing to do that for other students.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would not have met my boyfriend of 3 years. I would not have, been able to go to school for. I mean, I've never had to pay Queens for money because of generous scholarships. I would not have been able to travel to 3 countries. I mean, I was in Ireland last year, Poland the year before, and Guatemala my freshman year.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, I can truthfully and honestly tell you that the small, traumatic, yet not acceptable, inappropriate interactions that I've had at Queens, they do not outweigh the good. They do not outweigh the experience. I mean, it truly has been an experience, but I think that those situations had to happen so that if somebody says something that's disrespectful when I'm older, I know how to handle it. I know how to navigate it. It's not going to be anything that's new. And it sucks that we have to go through things in order to be ready in
Yeah.
the future. But I'm glad that it was younger Sydney and not 30-year-old Sydney who
Yeah.
wants to be this, top-notch person in healthcare. I mean, I would hate to revert back because um, I'm not mentally tough enough to handle it.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I know I made the right decision, and like I'm thankful for opportunities like the fellowship program. I mean, that's something they just sent in the Q News, and I applied for it, but it's been a highlight. I've been able to meet some amazing people. I mean, to hear Miss Bernice's family tell me we want to keep up with you. We want you to keep up with us. Please stay in touch. Thank you for asking us about our mom. I mean, they were literally in tears because no one has taken the time to genuinely get to know them and ask them about their mother and their grandmother because she was a trailblazer for every Black student who's entered Queens. And so I think it's little moments like that. Even interviewing you, I mean, I told you the first time, I'm telling you again, like you are an inspiration because you you have shown me that closed mouths don't get fed, and if you want something you have to be willing to ask for it. I mean, that's just it is what it is. And so I'm inspired, but I will also, I think I'll end on this note. I think you, as a Black woman, you make me feel really good because you don't negate the experiences that Black people have to encounter. Um, you understand and don't shy away from difficult conversations because they have to be held. And I think that's what makes me feel good because there have been multiple times where I feel like engaging in these conversations, white people try to play victim. And it's like, we're not asking you to play victim. We're just asking you to listen to us,
Yeah.
listen to our experience. It's not a blame game anymore. It's how can we move forward? And you just being willing to talk with me, share your experiences, but then ask me, okay, hey, how could we have done this better? How can we do better in the future? I think that is what makes me feel good, because it makes me feel seen and it makes me feel heard. And sometimes that's all people are asking for.
Yeah.
You know, we're not asking for a time change. Things happen for a reason. But I think in this moment, we just have to be willing to listen, to be willing to um, engage in difficult conversations, but then also figure out how do we move forward and how do we do better.
Yeah.
So thank you for talking with me. I'm glad we were able to, talk on a more intimate level than just the Student Alumni Council. And it's crazy how life comes full circle. I would have never thought that I, have the opportunity to be able to talk with you again. So thank you
Well,
tremendously.
thank you, Sydney, and I would love to stay in touch too. I've I think sometimes having um, you have my email address. I also I'll send you my